Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Overcoming Barriers to Allyship, brought to you by your Vanderbilt Alumni Association. I'm Sarah Whitney Anderson, Assistant Director of Alumni and Student Engagement, and I'm so glad you could join us from wherever you are. Today's webinar will last around 45 minutes with time at the end for questions, so please feel free to type those questions as you have them in the box on the side panel of your screen throughout the presentation, and we will make sure that they are addressed in some way before our time is up. We will also record today's webinar and post them on the Expert Advice webpage in VU Connect, and we will share this recording with you via email later this week. I'm excited to introduce our speaker, as he is a wonderful Vanderbilt volunteer and alumni board member. Cory Ponder is an empathy practitioner and educator who works with innovative companies and individuals to build safe spaces for inclusive and diverse experiences. Cory believes in the power of human connection and how that drives real impact. Over his 10 years of professional experience as a policy analyst in the public sector and a program manager and policy professional in the private sector, Cory knows that an emphasis on emotional intelligence, self-awareness, empathy, and interpersonal skills leads to a more committed, productive, and engaged workforce, creating a real impact in the workplace and spaces they occupy. Cory has scaled diversity programs across several companies, including with CIA and Facebook, and has developed and facilitated over 50 workshops on allyship, bias, privilege, and building empathy across the tech industry. He has also spoken on allyship for several organizations, including Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, Fitbit, Mom Warrior, and Diversability. He continues to publish on these topics, as well as most recently being featured in Fortune magazine's Race Ahead newsletter. Cory holds a master's in public policy from the University of California, Berkeley, and a bachelor's in political science from Vanderbilt University. I'm so excited to kick it off for you now.
Thank you. I appreciate that introduction. And
Hold on one second. It looks like our recording got cut off.
Oh, okay.
So everyone hold on one second. I actually think the session is already running. It's saying that it's closed, but I'm currently on it. I know. Can you see if any panelists are on with you right now? Do you see anything?
So it just says attendees 8, but I don't see anybody but yourself and me.
Okay. Okay, well, just in case people are hearing this conversation, I do apologize for the technical difficulties. Hold on one second and hopefully we'll get it fixed. So I think I'm going to have to end it.
Okay.
And then try to log it back. Well, there it is. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out where. Okay, maybe we're good. It just says that. Here, I'm going to put in the chat. This session is being recorded. Is everyone with us? I just put this in the chat box to everyone just to make sure that we're all together and y'all can hear us okay. That was so strange.
Yeah, is it
It just said that, like, on my screen that it quit recording and was not connected. So I just want to make sure that we do have it recorded. Okay. It now says that we're recording. So I think we're just going to keep going. And if y'all see any issues, just feel free to comment in the chat box if you're having any issues.
Great. Technical difficulties make everything funny.
Sorry about that, Cory.
No,
proceed.
Yes, so again, I'm very excited to be on this call to talk about allyship and to be having this conversation with fellow doors. And I enjoy talking about this. So I'm really excited to share my thoughts and think together about how we can overcome these potential barriers that come when we try to be allies for others in the different spaces that we occupy. So feel free if you have questions to use the tool, and we'll make sure to get to those either during the session or at the end. So to start, we live and work in a world of differences. And so some of those differences may feel benign. You know, we're constantly thinking about how we set ourselves apart at work, for instance, or how we think and innovate creatively by trying to push ourselves to think or see the world differently than others, people around us. You know, we think about how we can maximize our strengths. We, even growing up, I know it was reinforced to me a lot that our parents told us that we were special, that we were unique, and that we should celebrate the things that make us different from other people. However, we also know that the differences that we have can also create conflict and angst, especially when they're used to develop superficial divisions. So the idea that what you look like or where you grew up or who you're attracted to should not be diagnostic indicators of worth, skill, or value, but we know that those things can enter into our characterizations of strangers, whether we intend those things to be characterizations or criteria for worth, or we don't, and maybe that's unconscious. One of the first experiences that I remember at Vanderbilt, after, of course, the Branscombe Beach Party, which I'm not even sure if they have that anymore, but it was amazing, was actually questioning whether I belonged at Vanderbilt. And this was shortly after my first chemistry lab, Chem 102, I think it was. We were doing what was described as a simple introductory lab. We had to titrate an acid with a base. However, for me, despite all the advanced placement and honors classes I had taken in high school, the idea of an advanced lab for us wasn't going into an actual lab room, filling up flasks, identifying Bunsen burners, and like titrating chemicals. For us, it had mostly been memorization and filling out worksheets. And I remember that moment, my first lab, as I watched my other lab mates blow through the exercise in 1 hour while I barely got through the first step. I started to feel very different. And I remember wondering, what lens would people see me with after this class? What assumptions were people going to make about me? And would anybody in the class be able to relate to my experience and the experience that I was having in that moment? I was wondering after this class if people would really see me for who I really was and what I could really do. And I would just say that despite our differences and our unique experiences, I think that this feeling that I had in the chemistry lab, this feeling of feeling different, feeling excluded even, is a common story for all of us. And maybe for me it was a chemistry lab, but for you it could be a different memory or a different story. And it's maybe not isolated. Maybe we felt like this several times in our lives. And I think what we're all seeking, and I will speak for myself especially here, is in these moments, we really want validation and we really want an understanding of who we are as people to be there with others. And we want people to see what we can actually bring to the table. This is where allyship comes in for me, because at its core, allyship is seeing and validating others' experiences. It's about developing our capacity for empathy and being present for that story as though it were our own. And all of us, when we feel like outsiders, we're looking for someone who's willing to make the effort to see past the convenient narrative or the conventional story and to see us for the unique people that we really are. So, we're going to talk about today how we show up as allies for others. I remember shortly after the reemergence of the Me Too hashtag and the spotlight to society started shining on sexual harassment in the workplace, I eagerly jumped into the conversation and felt like I had a duty to organize a town hall to dissect this topic and force difficult conversations. And it was going really, really well. I was planning this event. A lot of people were bought in. A lot of people said, "Good job, Cory." But it wasn't until I was days away from the event did I realize that the very voices I'd been looking to empower had been left out of the conversation. I hadn't asked any of the women that I knew, or just women in general, who experienced sexual violence at higher rates, what the goal of a conversation like this would even be. And was it even the best approach? I hadn't even considered the possibility that this event could re traumatize and re trigger survivors. And while I love facilitating and speaking, I hadn't considered that this may not even be my story to tell. And so I remember I ended up postponing that event, and I took the time to educate myself on the resources that existed for survivors. I learned about the language around sexual violence, and I learned how to talk about it with survivors in a way that centers the person rather than the experience. I also learned that my value add was leveraging my connection to other men to elevate the importance of this conversation and these stories. And I realized that my superpower in this case was to be an insider who had outside cultural beliefs and to influence others to listen, to understand, and act, rather than being the person who owned the storytelling or spoke on behalf of these experiences. So this was a personal story for me to just illustrate that after that experience, I really wanted to focus more on how I could build inclusion through empathy for these stories. And as I crafted my business impact strategies around this mission, I realized that a key to accomplishing that would be to redefine how we think about our commitment to allyship. So we know we want to be allies, but how can we be allies? How should we be allies? And my experience with the Me Too Town Hall reminded me of conversations that we probably all used to have growing up. And it was this conversation around with our friends or family or siblings about which superpowers we want to have or which superpowered or super skilled person we'd want to pretend to be. And in my case, it's a conversation I actually still have with anybody who would listen. But I remember in those conversations, everyone wanted to be the hero because we were enthralled with this idea of swooping in to save the day. I definitely don't remember being on the playground clamoring to be Robin instead of Batman. And if you're on the call and you're thinking to yourself, actually, I did want to be Robin, you're either kidding yourself or you had some deep vision that I didn't have as a kid to see the power and the importance of the sidekick in every story. Or you actually just were a fan of his costume, which was amazingly red, yellow, and green, very bold. But true allyship isn't about being the hero. And I think that's something that I had to learn as I kind of stepped into this role and this opportunity to lead this town hall. We don't need more knights in shining armor who are riding in to save the day. And we don't need masked Avengers riding out on a white horse like a beacon of hope. We don't even need the person that enters into the battle at its most harrowing and hopeless moment to turn the tide in the final act. What we really need are trusted sidekicks. And based on my very critical and all important research into video games, movies, and television, I have distilled the characteristics of a trusted sidekick and by extension, an ally down to three traits. One, they are there for the everyday moments. Two, they are able to confront ugly truths, whether those truths are about themselves or the environment around them. And three, they use their magic or their abilities to help the protagonist of the story. So if you take nothing else away from the first part of this call is just when you think about showing up to be an ally, the biggest barrier actually is believing that you have to show up to be the hero as opposed to the trusted sidekick in the story. So, what is a trusted sidekick? If you've ever seen The Lion King, you know that Timon and Pumbaa were there for the everyday moments because they were there when Simba was at his worst after running away from home when his father died. And they were there for his happiest moment when he assumed his place on Pride Rock and in the great circle of life. They were also there for all those moments in between because they taught Simba how to eat bugs, which I'm sure was delicious, and they taught him Hakuna Matata, which means no worries. There was even a moment where we saw Timon, Simba, and Pumbaa walking on a log for what seemed like days and nights on end. And I can think of no better example of what being there for the everyday moments look like, which is being there to help someone put one foot in front of the other. In Mulan, we saw Mushu the dragon. He confronted an ugly truth about himself because when the story began, Mushu was more interested in proving that he could be the best spiritual guardian ever rather than actually helping Mulan. And initially, the help that he provided her was barely any help at all, and it did way more harm than good. At one point in the movie, though, Mushu confronted an ugly truth that a real spiritual guardian is not focused on themselves, but focused on selflessly helping others. And once he realized this, he became the trusted sidekick that Mulan needed. He not only helped her save the day, because this is a Disney movie, of course, but he also helped her restore honor to her family and helped her prove that she could be as fierce a warrior as any man. And finally, when I think about using your abilities to help the hero of the story, I can think of no better example than the Genie from Aladdin. Because when we first meet Aladdin, he and everyone around him sees him as a street rat. Maybe a street rat with dreams and a catchy song, but a street rat nonetheless. But when he found the Genie, he found someone that could give him the dreams that he always had. And he found someone that can make him feel like a prince. And the Genie used his magic to do just that. Aladdin got a magic carpet, and he got a monkey that turned into an elephant, and he had an amazing musical number. And in the process, the Genie helped Aladdin achieve his dreams. And he also helped Aladdin see that the prince that he wanted to be on the outside was a prince that he had always been on the inside. So, as we think about trusted sidekicks and we think about allies, I'm asking you, what are you willing to do to be a meerkat, a warthog, a dragon, and a genie beyond developing a great animation budget? First, think about how you show up for your colleagues in the everyday moments. Maybe that looks like making space to listen to someone, as my manager did for me when she saw that I was struggling to grapple with the deaths of Philando Castile and Alton Sterling, who were two black men that had been killed by police officers within a short window of each other. I thought about my experiences over the years interacting with police officers, recognizing how my mannerisms and my body language changed immediately to diminish myself in these moments in order to put the officer at ease. How I suddenly became conscious of everything about myself and my surroundings, my clothes, kind of car I was driving, what words was I using, wondering if anything about me could trigger the wrong impression. How I felt like being too much of myself in those moments could be the difference between a warning and a death sentence. and how simply being myself was sometimes enough to garner attention from an officer or a security guard. I remember trying to conduct myself that day with a business as usual attitude, leaving that part of myself that was working through all of these memories to be sorted out off the clock. But I realized remembering that what I needed most in that moment was for someone to just take the time to care. Something as simple as asking me, "How are you doing?" and then making the time to actually hear and process what my answer was going to be. It really mattered to me that day. And my conversation with my manager made me feel like it wasn't solely my burden to bear, and that this wasn't just my problem or my issue to understand. And her act also made me rethink the idea that only parts of myself were welcome in the workplace. All of me, my skills, my expertise, my life experiences, as well as my personal and professional challenges, could and should find a place in this space that I occupy almost every day. What are you doing to confront ugly truths about yourself or the environment around you? Part of that starts with accepting that we all have biases and being honest and accountable with ourselves about that fact. The second part is opening ourselves up to continuous learning and feedback, as I had to do when I was organizing an educational discussion on Me Too, as I mentioned earlier. Because even with the best of intentions, I realized that I had failed to incorporate women into my initial idea. And by extension, I had excluded their voice from the conversation. And I had to be open to that feedback, but not just open to it, I had to be willing to change. So I remember going around gathering feedback from my female friends and colleagues. I changed the event format. I developed resources that would minimize the risk of re-triggering and re-traumatizing participants. And I also asked if someone else could facilitate, opting to step into that session not as a speaker, but as a learner. I would also encourage you to take implicit association tests to uncover your unconscious bias. Because of the different isms that we face, whether it's racism, sexism, cisgenderism, ableism, just to name a few, they exist and they fuel our biases, whether we realize it or not. And again, everybody has biases, not just the stranger across the way whose character you can't vouch for, but family members that you've known all your life, partners you've committed to, and ourselves. No one is immune from bias. So if you're not looking inward to understand how your biases or privilege are at play, then you're failing to confront that simple truth. And finally, what is your magic? AKA your ability or the privilege that you bring into the room or bring into conversations. And what are you doing to leverage it in support of another's journey? You know, privilege is nothing to be guilty about. We all have some form of privilege because we represent a confluence of identities, experiences. And what matters is what you actually do with that privilege. One of the best stories that I've heard recently was from a woman that told me she hated going into brainstorming sessions because they always required a volunteer to take notes. And it would always default to her. One of her male colleagues, a senior member of the team, noticed that these sessions made her uncomfortable and that she always ended up being the person to take notes. And so one day he just started volunteering and making it seem like a privilege to take notes. Eventually, other members of the team followed suit. They eagerly volunteered and participated in note taking because they saw the senior member of the team do this as well. I am always acutely aware of the uphill battle that I face with perception. So if I am not polished enough in my appeals for fairness or too animated in my body language towards people or not deferential enough in my demeanor and tone when addressing an issue, my voice could fall onto closed hearts and minds because The stereotype of the angry and aggressive black man is real, and it sucks that I have to do the work to avoid triggering that reaction. I don't have the privilege or luxury to assume that if I get angry, people will just know that I'm not a threat and respect my voice. But this is where allies come in because they have an opportunity to use their privilege effectively, not just for themselves, but to the benefit of others without being patronizing or insulting. So, being a trusted sidekick ultimately means being in service to others so that they achieve their happily ever after. And when we serve others, we empower them. We create a permissive environment that empowers people to be their most authentic and productive selves. We empower people to fight for and build the world that they want to see. So, one of the barriers is, again, this idea that we have to be a hero. But even with the best of intentions, even knowing that we don't necessarily have to own the story, we don't necessarily have to own the cape, taking the actual step to show up and then actually coming up with a plan of action is not always the easiest thing to do. And from having these conversations with people, I find that sometimes it's because we let perfect become the enemy of the good. We step into situations and second guess our approach or our ability to actually speak out or speak up the right way, to use the right words, to show up in a way that matters or to show up in a way that's respected or valued. And in allyship, particularly, the enemy to our good could be the idea that maybe you're going to violate some social constraints and no longer fit in. It could be this idea that if you speak up or you step out as an ally, you might actually be seen as overly aggressive or the aggressor in a situation that actually wasn't that tense or was maybe more subtle than you initially thought it was. Or honestly, it could be more about the external factors. Sometimes there's just so much going on in the world that it's difficult to create space when to do more and to be more and to speak out more when there's so many other negative issues or critical issues that life ends up confronting us with. But with the remainder of this time, what I want to do is just kind of walk you through a tool that I like to use to help us think about how we can overcome some of these actual fears that hold us back. And that tool is called cognitive restructuring. Now, cognitive restructuring is a useful technique because it helps you understand, in general, not related to allyship, it helps you understand unhappy feelings or moods, and it helps you with challenging the sometimes wrong automatic beliefs that can lie behind those unhappy feelings or moods. And this technique was developed by the psychologist Albert Ellis in the mid 1950s. And so the goal of this is not necessarily to provide you any type of psychiatric advice around like overcoming fears or overcoming like real trauma, but it is to give you a taste of how you can think about barriers to allyship as just a fear that we hold and a barrier that is rooted in something deeper, some type of automatic belief that we can identify and hopefully reverse. So on the call, we're going to walk through this, and if you want to move along with it and write down the different stages of this, you're more than welcome to. I'll pause between each one, give you an explanation of why that step, what the goal is of each step, and you can use that time to step through the exercise on your own, as well as jot down any questions or thoughts you might have around each step and kind of what it's bringing up for you. So as you can see, the first step of the exercise of cognitive restructuring is to really calm yourself. There's always so many things that we have going on, so many things that we're thinking about. And the first step really is to kind of clear your mind. whether that's through meditation, whether that's through a moment of silence. One of the things that I would say here is, it's really important when you're first entering into this space to be very intentional about, again, whatever that trauma is or whatever that experience is that you're feeling in the moment. And one of the prompts that I like to use when thinking about, I guess, allyship and barriers to allyship for myself is to start with, why didn't I speak up in that moment? And so as I'm calming myself, usually the prompt that I am thinking of when I'm using this exercise for allyship conversations is that, let me center on this idea of why didn't I speak up? So after you have calmed yourself and meditated, the next step is to take some time to write about the situation. So again, I gave the example earlier about the Me Too movement and the town hall. But for me, I can use another example. I remember I was in a room, and this again was something that happened to me. So I was sitting at my desk, and some people were having a conversation about different hair types, and I missed most of the conversation, but I caught the tail end, which was just, Cory doesn't have to do anything to his hair. It's just naturally like that. And before I could even respond, this person just like planted their hands in my hair. It was like, see? And then, and then they just walked off. Everybody laughed and it was over and it was done. And I remember in that moment really feeling like, man, I don't know what happened. I'm not sure how I was supposed to respond, if I'm going to make a bigger deal out of this than it actually is. Why did I react that way? Should I say something? What should I say? But most important, I was thinking, I wonder if there's any allies around me that saw what I saw and could validate my experience. And so when I write about the situation, what I would want to write about in this case is why, like, I felt the way that I felt. What happened? What was the thing that I felt like was the slight or the wrong that I saw or that I perceived? The next step is to actually then write about the moods that you felt. So this isn't just about like the descriptive what happened, but it's actually going a step further. Like, how did that actually make you feel? Did it make you angry? Did it make you sad? Did it make you scared? What was that moment? So again, like for me, I think I felt a lot of confusion and a lot of talked earlier about feeling excluded, but maybe feeling singled out and not really sure if that part of me was something that I wanted people to kind of other and point out as different from the other people in the room. And so I felt very vulnerable. And for me, those two things really were like kind of my immediate reactions. So then these next steps, these next three, I feel like are kind of really important. I think they provide a more analytic and logical lens and framework to how we think about and react to emotionally triggering situations. So this next step is to write about the thoughts you experience in relation to these moods or feelings. And so again, like now we're moving away from feelings, but actually trying to put thoughts to them. Like, are there any beliefs that came up in your mind because of that? And so again, for my example, maybe I remember that one of the first things I thought is, oh man, I am so different from the people here at my, in my cubicle, in my little group. I felt othered. I felt like the differences that I had were something that I had to be maybe ashamed of because I couldn't relate to the other people's experiences. And so those were the thoughts that I experienced in relation to those feelings or moods. Then we're going to actually try to list evidence to support these thoughts. So again, as I mentioned, it's like trying to apply an analytic framework to this idea of how do you overcome a barrier or how do you overcome a real fear. But what is your evidence to support these thoughts? These evidence, in my case, to support that you are different, that you should be ashamed if that's the thought that you had, if you should feel like you don't fit in. What are the evidentiary pieces to support those thoughts? They could be actual facts. They could be precedents for things that you have seen in the past. Other experiences that you can tie to this one. They can be not even necessarily like factual things, but things that other people have said that would confirm this. So maybe somebody saying something to you about hair in the past, in my case, that would lead you to believe that that would be a true way to think about this. So the key here is not necessarily that the evidence is fact based, but that they are more things that support your beliefs. And there are things that you could list out and say, these are related to the thoughts and experiences that I've had. Just as critical, as I mentioned, is step 6. So you've gone through and you've come up with evidence to support these thoughts, but how do you counter these thoughts? There might be evidence out there, which is harder to do sometimes, that would not confirm your initial response, your initial belief about that situation, about why you reacted that way. So what is the evidence out there? This step is probably a little harder because it's probably easier to find things to confirm what we already believe and how we already react. But what are those things that are counter to that narrative? So again, step through, find evidence that counters these thoughts. And then the goal of 4, 5, and 6 is really to write and come up with one balanced thought. Because again, when we turn this back to allyship and we turn this back to how you overcome those barriers, what we're looking at is a moment where we could have spoken up, where we could have said something, where we knew in our gut that something was off about that experience and we saw it happen to somebody else, but we decided not to act on that. And that balanced statement could be something like, I saw X happen, and I thought in this case that it wasn't worth saying anything because I knew the situation. The person who did it was actually joking, but in the future, I also realized that even a joke is not small to the person who had to experience that or was the victim or the butt of that joke. And so the balanced thought is about seeing both sides of your response to the situation and to why you didn't speak up. And then finally, if you go through that entire process, we should end with, hopefully, a positive affirmation that's going to actually help you see speaking up differently in the future. So what is one thing that you can come up with out of this that will tell you, like, hey, like, my voice, my thinking, my way of viewing this is actually a good thing, and I should use my voice in the future to kind of make that difference. And so maybe that positive affirmation is, hey, everybody wants to feel validated. I know that that's something really important to me. So if I feel like I can't do this in the future, I can't be an ally, just remember that it's all about validating others, and people really need to feel validated. That could be a positive affirmation for you. Maybe a positive affirmation is, my voice is stronger than I realize, and I have the opportunity and privilege to really help people, act the way that I feel like they should in an inclusive and collaborative space. So as you walk through this exercise, the goal is really to give you that positive affirmation that will help you see what your potential to be an ally can be the next time you're faced with a similar situation. So this is my last slide, and I just want to thank you for being on the call today. I hope that you all leave this call thinking about how you can be trusted sidekicks and how you can think about the barriers that you might see presented in your own personal walk with allyship, and how you can start to think differently about those barriers and eventually overcome those barriers. because it's not easy work, but I think at the core of allyship really is this idea of getting comfortable with discomfort. It's not easy to be there day in and day out, and it's not easy to confront our own privileges, our own biases, or our own fears. But it's even harder to try and do something about those things. And the work that we have to do to really realize like inclusive spaces and inclusive communities actually starts inwardly before it can manifest itself on the outside. And so I just want to thank you for being on the call and taking this first step in that direction, or continuing the journey for those of you who are familiar with the concept and are looking to do more. And I hope there are some nuggets here that you can take with you into the different workplaces or spaces that you're in to help you with your journey as an ally. So thank you.
Thank you, Cory. This has been wonderful. I know I took a lot of notes myself. So thank you for sharing your wise words. Before we let you go, we do have time for questions. So if you have anything that you would like to ask Cory, please continue to put those in the question box. So we'll wait for those, but I do have one question for you. All ready to go, Cory? So the first question is, do you see allyship and its tactics needing to be different across sectors?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the answer to that is yes. I think too often, as an example, I remember again talking about the Me Too conversation. That was a great analysis done by someone on the difference between Me Too when it's in kind of a corporate setting with like primarily white women, as opposed to service industry where women are typically women of color. And how even just the idea of Me Too and how it's the tactics of the campaign, like speaking out online, outing individuals who have wronged or done wrong things to women, doesn't necessarily give women of color who are in service industries the same type of power over their aggressors, because many of those individuals are in positions where they need the work or where they don't have something else to fall back on, or don't have some of the privileges that are afforded to even other communities of women. And so it's just a reminder that I think we should always be thinking about tactics, which is why I definitely start at a high level and talk about allyship as support, because one of the key things is really understanding who you're being an ally for and what that community needs, as opposed to going in and saying like these tactics worked here, so they'll work over there as well.
Great, thank you. Next question is, do you have any tips for how to address your blind spots?
Yeah, I think a lot about this, even in my own work. Again, the example that I gave at the beginning was really about how I failed and can still fail to show up in the best way as an ally, even as I, do this work. So I would just say a lot of it to me comes down to being willing to seek out feedback, but also understanding that there's more you can do to like educate yourself, especially with the amount of information that's out there in this day and age, who constantly push yourself to actually learn and do more. And so I remember after that, I mentioned in my talk, I remember like spending some time really asking for feedback from people that I knew, that I was close to, and actually asking them like how I showed up the way that you would want someone to show up. And for, I didn't put pressure on it or make people feel like they had to respond, but I think because they were people close to me, they were willing to give me that feedback. And I told them I was serious about incorporating that into kind of how I viewed things, or how I would respond differently in a situation like that. So I think being willing to seek out feedback is hard, especially if you're not sure if it's going to be critical, but it's important. And then beyond that, I just really started looking online for resources that would help me understand that situation a bit more. So I think anything, the extent you could do to find newsletters, or to find like authors or people that write on different topics, or video channels or TED Talk channels where they talk about this topic. I think that is like some of the biggest things you can do to help you with your blind spots, because you don't know what you don't know. And if we kind of sit with a fixed mindset, I think that we miss a lot of opportunities to grow through others' experiences.
Great. I've got one more question for you. What are some other resources and avenues to learn more about allyship and finding out what I do or do not know?
Yeah. So a lot of great stuff out there. I mean, I will point out, I know in my bio, one of the newsletters I mentioned that I wrote for was Fortune, is they had a race ahead newsletter. So I think that's a great resource because they basically compile a lot of different types of articles around, like, here's like different things happening with different identities or communities, and you can learn about those communities. There's actual resources on allyship, like here's how you actually here's a thing you can actually do today to be a better ally. So I would say that's a great resource. And then I would also say that for me, I found the greatest resource to actually be like stepping out into like my workspace and finding people who, I don't talk to. So I'm not even going to say that are different than you, like that you're going out and trying to identify something different or unique about somebody, but literally just people that I don't talk to that often. And I try to grab lunch or coffee with them, like, or somebody at least every other week. And I've learned so much from people that way. I had ended up a great relationship with the individual that I still talk to today, where like we were on the same team, and I noticed that they didn't really like they would always have more critical feedback about things that I would post or say internally at the company about, allyship or about community or about ideas around what it means to support others. And so I remember just reaching out to them and just having ended up being a very fruitful conversation around their beliefs, how they show up, and it was very respectful. And I actually learned a lot about why they believe what they believe, because so much of what they believe was rooted in their personal story. And so I remember, even though I didn't necessarily come out of it agreeing with everything they said, I actually could see them as a person after that conversation. And so we don't agree on everything, but I've come to, from those types of engagements, really kind of just have a broader perspective on like very difficult conversations sometimes, whether it's about politics or like beliefs around different communities, because I know we're all different, but we can still talk if we feel validated and heard.
Great. We actually did get one more question. So this one, sometimes the actions of an ally can do more damage than good. How do you tackle allyship in these situations?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the allyship sometimes in those instances are more performative than anything else. And so I think that those types of acts are usually centered on the person that wants to be seen as an ally instead of the community that they are serving. And so I think in those moments, if you are the person who is seeing this performative allyship, I think this is a moment where, as an ally, that you hold them accountable. So that goes back to that confronting ugly truths piece, which is, hey, like, allyship is not actually about you. I want to sit down and have a conversation around like kind of how you showed up in this moment, because I don't feel like centering yourself in this was the best thing for whatever the issue is you're trying to speak on. But if, again, I think allyship, the other thing that I would say is less like hitting a home run and more like, trying to get a better slugging percentage. The goal is not to knock it out of the park every time, but just to increase your, percentage over time. So, you're going to falter. You're going to have these moments where you're like, I could have done that better. But I think it's like actually opening yourself up to learn from that and being willing to listen so that you can go back and do it better the next time is key.
I think that helped me a lot personally as well. So there's no more questions. I want to thank you all for coming out and listening to Cory's great webinar. And I also encourage you to check out all of our career resources, both in person and electronic, that are provided by the Vanderbilt Alumni Association. Again, later I will send a follow-up email with this archived link and a request for feedback, so look out for that. And on Monday, we will have our next webinar with our own career coach, Casey Carden, on leadership. So make sure to sign up for that if you are interested. We're always looking to improve upon our offerings for alumni, so please be in touch and let us know how we can best support you. Thank you for joining us and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.